Russia is secretly preparing a Bitcoin price bomb. That's what it says in a leak from the Forbes article. And the craziest part is that this is happening exactly one day before Donald Trump and Putin are meeting for peace talks. And now it gets even crazier. Right now, just an hour ago, the news came in that Vladimir Putin has allowed the US to sell his securities, meaning parts of the Russian securities that were frozen by Joe Biden. This is indeed an absolute surprise, and could put the entire global financial markets in distress or shake them up, because we know that this was also a very, very bad move. Biden's decision to freeze Russian assets here simply led to a massive loss of trust in the USA, when people simply knew, okay, they can no longer trust the USA and so on. We look at the full implications of what the meeting is all about. Will this bring more calm to the market, or will this shake up the markets even more? And especially what this leak is all about. Here in the Forbes article, they are now assuming that Russia is secretly planning a price bomb. First, let's take a look at the meeting, and this could really be crucial. Here it says that President Trump is expected to talk to Putin about a peace agreement with Ukraine. According to Bloomberg, an announcement could come on Tuesday. Trump says there are very good chances for an agreement. And that could also mean that this is really good for the markets, that the markets will take this very, very well. That means we have to watch very closely on Tuesday to see what comes out of this negotiation. If something positive really comes out of this, it could be a very, very good sign for the market. We really need to be careful. This week is going to be huge. We've got the peace talks here, and one day later is the Fed meeting. That means it can definitely get volatile, but it could also turn out to be very, very positive for Bitcoin. Who knows? I mean, with Trump, you never know. There could be some crazy thing that comes out later. And then Trump might do something ridiculous or something like that. And then it crashes back down or something. That could also be the case. But the much crazier thing that's happening here, I actually found this out just an hour ago. Vladimir Putin is allowing some investment funds, including American ones, to sell Russian securities. This is happening one day before the talks with President Trump about a ceasefire in Ukraine. And this is really an absolute game changer. The Russian assets would be frozen if it was said, okay, hey, we want to impose sanctions against Russia. Then you have government bonds and other assets that were held here in the US, and they were just frozen. So theoretically, they still exist, but Russia doesn't have access to them. And there were also interest earnings, and the interest earnings, that was already a huge scandal that they were using the interest earnings from these assets. Further war measures here in Europe. I think that was also the case back then. France really pushed hard for that. I think the EU also really pushed for it to be done that way. They obviously wanted even more. But then I think they agreed to use the interest and put it back into using that against Russia again, which is kind of absurd, right? I mean, if it's your own assets, you can do whatever you want with it. But when it comes to foreign confiscated assets, and then you have this kind of international conflict creating tension, it's definitely a serious step being taken here. And that was also a signal to the market, like, hey, if you hold US government bonds, then at any moment we could freeze those bonds. At any moment, we could use the interest earnings against you and so on. And then you first saw a massive unrest in the market. I mean, right now, US government bond yields are going back down because more and more, I'd say, security is coming back to the US. But back then, it was definitely a crazy situation. But it also shows us, keep your Bitcoin in self-custody. Get yourself a hardware wallet, then no one can censor anything from you. Censorship is always a danger, not just for US government bonds, but also for general assets. That's why I'm putting a link down below to a TREZOR hardware wallet. Here, with the code, you get 10% off the purchase of a Bitcoin hardware wallet. That way, you're really safe from censorship, hackers, theft, and a lot more. The reason why the assets might be sold here could actually be because Putin might actually make a concession. Maybe this is already some sort of initial deal or something where they say, okay, hey, you can sell the assets here, and in return, we'll make peace and so on. And then everyone somehow, you know what, we've stopped making war here, you somehow have the assets here. I mean, I don't know if that's how it is. Could be that this is part of the deal. The deal is probably going to be even bigger, since Ukraine has to come into play as well. But it could be that there's a mix between different territorial divisions that will then be established. Additionally, there might be some financial deals made. And in the end, they come up with some kind of deal together. This has also led to the sanctions causing Russia to increasingly rely on alternatives, like Bitcoin and so on. We'll get to the price bomb that was leaked in Forbes in just a moment. This has led them to engage with crypto with Bitcoin. The finance minister said that Bitcoin is being used for international trade. Putin said that Bitcoin can't be banned when he was asked at a press conference. That means they have definitely dealt with Bitcoin here, or rather, they had to deal with Bitcoin here because they were simply forced to do so. That means they had a need to know, just like Michael Salem always says. He says that as long as you don't have a need to know, it's really, really hard for you to understand Bitcoin. But if you have a need to know, like if you really need a solution, then you'll definitely understand Bitcoin. And it looks like that's what's happening now. I also strongly assume that if Putin makes a concession now, then the capital controls might potentially be loosened, and Russia might also face less censorship, making international trade easier again. This is because they've been partially excluded from the banking systems and so on. Maybe there will be an additional deal where they can only trade with certain countries in dollars or something like that. I can definitely see that happening. But those are some potential scenarios that could be coming our way tomorrow. And we need to keep a close eye on that. Now let's actually take a look at the leak that happened here, because this is a big deal. You can see it right here at the top of the Forbes article. It says, leak. Reveals Russia is quietly priming Bitcoin and crypto for a price bomb. So they're quietly preparing a price bomb. It says here that oil companies in Russia are using Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, including Ethereum and the stablecoin Tether, to convert rubles into the Chinese yuan and the Indian rupee, reported people citing anonymous sources. And this is probably the main group of people we're talking about here, that now Russia is using Bitcoin for international trade. Maybe Donald Trump wanted to step in, and that's why he met with Putin. I mean, Donald Trump always has his own interests. Of course, this is about peace with Ukraine and all that. But here, it's definitely going to be Donald Trump. It's also about the fact that Putin is probably going to use more dollars again, because as it stands now, he's been pushed away from the dollar. He's now using Bitcoin, Ethereum, stablecoins, and so on. And I've explained this in another video before, where it was also about how to bypass capital controls and such. So they sometimes use third parties like middlemen. So Russia isn't sending Bitcoin directly to China. Instead, Russia is sending Bitcoin to the middleman. This middleman then sends the Bitcoin to China, and in China, this middleman converts the Bitcoin back into the Chinese currency. So we basically have Bitcoin just as a transfer path. That means Bitcoin isn't used as a native currency, but just as an intermediary. And maybe the Lightning Network is being used. Depending on how fast the transactions need to be, we either have to use Bitcoin or the Lightning Network. And then it says here that Bitcoin and crypto are now seen as the preferred trading medium among Russian oil companies. And this is the second leak or the second shocking news. But I didn't know that it is used as a preferred means of trading here. And this is actually very, very new to me. Then this report even says that this is happening so much that they would continue to be used even if sanctions were lifted and the US dollar became usable again. So it seems they're now so satisfied with the Bitcoin trades that they have no interest in going back to the US dollar. That means they would now be displaced by the US dollar, but have now figured out, hey, with Bitcoin, with stablecoins, and so on, things are going much better than with the US dollar. And it's definitely a heavy blow, and that's also why I say, hey, in the meeting, it's probably not just going to be about peace, but Donald Trump will likely find some kind of deal to get Russia trading in US dollars again. Because the US has a big interest in having a lot of people trading in US dollars, since that boosts the demand for US dollars. And if no one here is in the US dollar anymore, then the US dollar won't be the world's reserve currency anymore. Then it also says here in the Forbes article, in accordance with the instructions of the Russian president, the Bank of Russia has sent proposals to the government to discuss regulations on investments in cryptocurrencies. It says in a translated announcement. That's probably every other hit that's being referred to here. That was something new for me in that way, because I knew there was a test period and so on. Messing around with cryptocurrencies, which wants to allow various investors and so on. So you need a license for that. Apparently, you can't just do that as an institutional investment in Russia. But it actually says here that proposals are being sent to the government to discuss regulations on investments in cryptocurrencies. And for me, that means something similar to a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the US. But here, it's not called a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Instead, it's referred to as investments in cryptocurrencies. And I can definitely imagine that this is also referring to some kind of stockpile or something like that, although that's just my interpretation. Feel free to let me know if you see it differently. It then says at the end, this is a new status that citizens receive when their investments in securities and deposits exceed 100 million rubles. What's interesting is that, for example, we've seen in the last 6 weeks that the Bitcoin ETFs haven't been doing so well. Thomas Farah writes here, US Bitcoin ETFs have sold 7,400 Bitcoin year to date. So, since the beginning of the year, they've actually been selling Bitcoin in the ETFs. If I understand this correctly, I thought that was crazy. I wasn't really aware that things looked so bad right now. But of course, the Bitcoin prices have really taken a hit. Now, in the last few months and so on. And then, of course, nation states. In the background, if they're filling their pockets, that would definitely be a great price driver. So you don't really know for sure. Are purchases happening from Russia? What sales are happening? In what sizes? How does it happen? Is it happening in a budget-neutral way, just like in the US? Or is some other money being loosened up? And so on. But no matter what Russia, the US, and so on are doing, the long-term signs are still bullish. Arthur Hayes also touches on why he's feeling bullish for the end of the year in his latest forecast. A lot of people are still in such an uncertain situation. They're afraid to put capital in here because they don't know how things are going to play out. Arthur Hayes is making a clear statement here.
He had a great run from 20,000 to 110 on Bitcoin, essentially, FTX lows until, Trump coin. And now we're having a 30% correction. It's pretty normal for a bull market. So I think, yes, people might have had a little bit too much leverage. Maybe they bought too many coins, but I think we're going to clear out all that dead wood. And I still believe that we could be 250,000 Bitcoin by the end of the year. Does that mean that the particular coin you own is going to be 100x higher? Probably not, because people are getting a little bit more discerning in the type of things that they own. But at least from Bitcoin perspective and the overall market capitalization of crypto, I think we're going to be much higher by the end of the year than we are today.
So he makes it very clear again that there is no need to worry, no need to worry. By the end of the year, we'll definitely be standing much higher than we are now. He's talking about $250,000 here. Arthur Hayes mentions throughout his entire interview, I watched the whole thing, various reasons why the strategic Bitcoin reserve is going to move forward even more, and that there will be more calm coming back into the market. That interest rates will be lowered again, and that the market environment will improve. Wow, it's so loud right now. The funny thing is, he's even talking about the whole EU situation and stuff about Germany, the EU, which is now planning its debt packages and so on. He believes that it's definitely inflationary and that this will push Bitcoin even higher. I read that earlier, and now even more debt is being planned. I think 1.7 trillion is already planned. Now, March is really going to go all out now. I haven't looked at it closely yet. I still need to check it out. But that's pretty intense. That there are already investments here, macro traders, etc. It's coming to the point where Germany and the EU are going to be the ones fueling the next Bitcoin pump. I mean, that's not going to pump Bitcoin massively just because they're throwing $1 trillion or 1.5 trillion into the market. This will mainly have negative effects on Germany and Europe. It will have minimal effects on Bitcoin. Of course, it will be, let's say, positive, but not overwhelmingly positive. It's definitely interesting that you guys are saying that interest rate cuts and quantitative easing are going to happen all over the world. In China, he says it's going to happen. In Europe, in the USA, and in Japan, it's coming. Those are the 4 major regions where he said he expects interest rate cuts and quantitative easing. And that's why he's definitely expecting 250K. So he's ultra bullish. Guys, if you want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link down below for you. 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Definitely check it out, whether you're new or have been around for a while. 21 Bitcoin, really the best place to go here. Regulated and whatever. So just check it out, give it a try, and buy Bitcoin if that's what you want. This is not investment advice. I'm signing off, folks. See you later. Peace out.